Hello everyone, this is the Race3 from SpinTech. Featuring DYS, Race Edition 1407 4300 kV motors, HGLRC flight stack, 28 amp ESC, F4 flight control with an OSD, and the TX02 Foxeer Predator Micro Gym Fan 3052 props. Mine weighs 127 grams, 4mm bottom plate, arms are 7.5mm wide, and it comes with a host of 3D printed parts and extra nylon pieces. XT30! XT30! So I think 3-inchers are finally starting to get their due. We kind of started real low and we were working off of brushed, and then we went to micro brushless and the 2-inch, and then 2.5, and actually when 2.5, before it really took hold, we saw some 2.8-inch props from King Kong. We saw those being used on some 1104s, and then we've kind of worked our way up. Even though 3-inch has probably been around longer than all those, it just hasn't gotten its due. And hopefully what you've seen from the video is something like this is for the person who's looking for that nth degree of performance. I am not an aerodynamic engineer, but with skinny arms like this and a Lexan body like this, the aerodynamics have got to help us. You don't have anything flat on here, so the wind should just whiz by, and most of our power is being used to actually propel the machine and not fight the machine or any of its flat areas. Now, this has gone through a few revisions. I have broken a couple here, so to give you some solace, here is one broken arm, and it came off of this one. And if you look, broke that arm too. These arms are narrower at 6.5 millimeters, so some adjustments have been made there. We also made some adjustments. I say we. I crashed these things, took pictures, and sent it to Mr. SpinTech, and he made adjustments, basically because he wanted to see some additional live in the field results. This one I broke right near the motor mount, so you can tell from this one. Hopefully, you get a good idea that things have been beefed up around there as well to help ensure durability. And so those are the two I broke. And I could probably continue breaking, but at some point, for a machine that just flat out flies through the air just quick as you can get, I think we've done quite a bit to make a rigid frame. And he actually mills these with his own equipment right in his garage. I find that very, very interesting, and actually quite expensive, I suspect, too. But then you take a look at the carbon. But now I'm not a carbon guy. I don't study this stuff to the nth degree. If I were to design a frame, which I did, but it was kind of right before micro cameras came out, so it wasn't really relevant anymore. It was 130 millimeter micro that would take a full-size CCD camera. 03 is called. I designed that with dead loop. My understanding is, regardless of what we see here, this is just an overlay. It's not necessarily how the weave is necessarily underneath the layers down here. That's just something that's put on the top and the bottom of the carbon to kind of give it that look. Because we see that varies. Sometimes it's glossy, sometimes it's flat. The weave changes, so I don't know how much we can actually see just by looking at it. But you tell me. Again, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure not going to play one. That was something that I had read about carbon, is that the top and bottom can be misleading. Maybe they lay this on there to give you an idea of what the weave looks like underneath. Could be. I don't know. But I think we've made a number of changes on this to make this frame as durable as can be, as well as continuing to keep that nth degree of performance. Now, I did have a couple of runs actually. I think I spent about a week running camera tilt almost max. You can see I'm just off of max there. Hopefully you can see that. There's just a little, let me camera get to focus here. There's just a little bit of space here at the top of the canopy. And you know, of course, if you wanted to go Matty Stunts crazy, you could take your Dremel out and shave this down. Now, I should draw your attention to the fact that, so I broke a couple frames, but I never broke a canopy. What typically happens in a crash, if you do get that center impact, is that your nylon will snap off. Now, in my particular case, I used metal screws in the bottom, here and here, and then I used nylon screws in the top in case, well, in this case, I've got metal now in there, but I typically use nylon, and the nylon would snap and then the top would shift. That probably helps to reduce that impact. And I wanted it that way just so that the canopy would possibly come off rather than shifting everything back. I did have a crash, not on this one, but on the 2.5-inch version, where the camera went back into the flight stack and ended up shorting out the ESC and killing that. And what I found was if I went with nylon on the top, the whole camera pod would shift and had more ability to come up rather than shoving the camera back. I also have since, if you can see there, my connector, I have shifted to where that's at the lower part. That was a tip I got from one of you. Thank you very much. I do think these motors are a little bit high kV. 4,300 kVs, probably higher than I needed to go. I got these motors from Kenny Cox. He's an avid flyer. He's also Air Arsenal. Many of you are probably familiar with his frames, and he also collects motors and then sells them on his web shop. Sometimes he just sells them on Facebook as well. So I picked these up from him, and he did say that he felt they lacked a little bit of torque. And I thought for something with, you know, very lightweight, very high performance driven, that the torque wouldn't be as big a deal. And I really don't think it was. I think I could use a touch more torque, but not much. So if I drop these down to like 4100s, and I don't even know if this edition is available in 4100s, that would probably be my sweet spot for how I want it to feel on the sticks. But it is a flying rocket. I had a great time flying it. You may be wondering about the forever tubes. I said this in one other video. I have no idea why they call them forever tubes, because they do not last forever. And I use two, even though I don't have a dual antenna receiver in there. It's just the XM, not the XM Plus. Because sometimes when I would come in for a landing, when that rarely did happen, and you bounce it, you know, you don't cut the you don't disarm in time, and so you get that air mode bounce when it comes down, that it would it would land nice and soft on those forever tubes. So that's why I've got two back there. You do get, as I included in the specs, you get a number of these 3D printed pieces. You can, of course, substitute out the camera mount if you wanted to go with something metal. And we have another 3D printed piece down here. I think the 3D printed pieces I have won't fit because, we did beef up the motor diameter around here to make sure that the motors wouldn't break loose and snap right there, as they did in one particular case with that frame there. With this flight stack, it is a little bit tight back here, so you're going to make sure, especially on the center pads for your ESCs, that this post, it's flexible. You know, you just kind of you finagle it around. You can use the forever tubes to manipulate it if you've got it assembled on top. And that's one thing I did do. The canopy, when I was taking this on and off, is I left all the nylon connected to the canopy itself if it was intact when I went to work on it again. So, you know, you can just put this down and then you kind of just pull out on this a little bit and then you run the screws through the bottom and then you're good to go. So I suspect the 3D printed stuff, you've got everything from TPU, I guess you'd call them soft mounting in there. We've also got various nylon hardware in there. You do need to trim these down. They're the extra long ones, but you can use them in the front and the rear to help keep your nylon. I'm not certain I'm going to continue to use the Predator, because I am finding now that you don't see it in this flight footage that you've seen, but I did some flying actually today with some different quads, and one of them had the Fox Ear Predator and another one didn't. And I noticed that as the trees continue to get some leaves and the light shines through, that there is a harsh flash when you go from kind of a shadowy or less light to bright light when the sun's coming right through that canopy or those trees, that it's kind of harsh on your eyes, and it makes it, for me, a little bit difficult to fly. And I found that another CMOS camera that has 1200 TV lines didn't have that issue. So I might be swapping away from the Fox Ear. And I was thinking about this. If you want to see that in action, I'll make a short video about the comparison, or just in this particular camera. I don't know if it comes through in the DVR footage quite like it does in the goggles, but in the goggles it's kind of shocking. Almost like you were sleeping and someone just walked in the room and flipped on the lights. Kind of like that, maybe. That's maybe the best analogy I can give you. So we've got, this could be a little bit lighter. You know, we came in at, what, 123 grams. I did use a pretty big Race Day quad strap. I was experimenting with different battery sizes for how I wanted it to fly in the backyard. You know, something this fast, it's making my yard smaller and smaller. You know, 2 years ago the yard was fine, but I am having to be very active on the sticks in order to fly like I want to fly and keep the thing from smacking trees, which I wasn't completely successful with. I hit a few things, and you've probably been watching a crash reel right up here of various crashes that I've had with this machine. So I think if you want to race a 3-inch, or you want a 3-inch that you can feel like a racer, or you're just looking for top performance, maybe you want to set a 3-inch speed record. I don't know if anybody's doing that. This seems like a pretty good candidate because of the fact that the only flat components that you have to give you wind resistance is the frame itself, and we need that for the structural durability. Again, I know many aren't a fan of this because of HGLRC support, maybe a decrease in quality of components, and you can get the Maytech 401 or 411. This is the Maytech F411 flight controller. It's highly regarded. I have not used it yet, so don't think this is a recommendation, but this seems to be the flight controller many people who don't like stacks are going to. It does come with gummies, if you can see them there, and then you also come with these brass bushings, so you can go down to 2 millimeters for your mounting, and then you can get a 4-in-1 ESC of your choice. I have been using the SpinTech or SpinTech stuff. You haven't seen it yet here much. I don't think I've posted any videos on that yet, but I've been using those ESCs in a stack format, and they seem to be doing very well. I suspect their format that has a wiring harness going for the signal and voltage from the ESC to the flight controller, I think they would work pretty well. They sell them from Race Day Quads. I think you can buy them on Amazon. Pyroflip sells them. I'm sure many different shops have those ESCs and this board. These boards aren't cheap, though. They come in at a little bit of a premium. I think $24, $25, maybe even upwards of $30 depending upon your source. I'll poke around. I'll put those links down in there because in the last video I talked about this, but I didn't put any links down at the bottom, and then I was immediately asked about that. So you have some electronic component options there that I'm giving you as a suggestion if you don't like this particular flight stack. I do think this thing is a burner. It's one I can't necessarily suggest for someone who might just be getting started. I think if you're an experienced pilot, or if you're gaining experience, or maybe you fly at a really high altitude, I don't want to exaggerate that. If you fly well up in the air, you're not getting close to objects yet, and you're still getting your stick feel down and your different moves, it might be fine. But I think if you're flying more in a race style format, that you should be a fairly accomplished pilot before you try to get into something like this, just because it's not that it's hard to fly, it's that it's so fast. If you're in a tight track or tight space, you're going to really need to be on the ball with the sticks and make sure you control this machine, or it's going to get away from you real quick. It's fun. And what it felt like to me, especially when I had the camera angle pretty much all the way up in that video that I showed here a little bit ago, it felt like I was riding a bull and I was just trying to hold on for 9 seconds. So you should check out the frame. I think it comes in around 30-40 bucks. It's made in California. They're made to order. So if you order on one day, I think it might take a day or two before it actually gets cut and shipped out. So something to consider when you're looking at placing your orders, that it's not, there aren't stock pile of these, but maybe he is, now that we've kind of finalized some of these dimensions. Maybe he'll cut a few more. I know that when, in my case, where I was saying, I was sending the pictures and then he would cut it, he'd make some changes and cut it and send it back, that it would take a few days. But I enjoyed that time crash testing the Race3, and it's a fast quad. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please leave those in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.